Thomas Harrington Coach Builders, known for their many innovative creations. In the early 1960s, they produced a coach that was one of the UK's most memorable classic designs, but it also was one of their last. This is the story of the Harrington Cavalier and Grenadier, and how Harrington went out with a bang. Hi, this is Jeffrey, and in this video, we're going to take a look at the Harrington Cavalier and Grenadier. These were the last two coaches designed and built by Harrington Coach Builders, and very often one is confused with the other because they look very similar in appearance, and we'll be seeing that in the video. Now, another issue here is that it's very difficult to do a documentary video on anything Harrington. And the reason for that is because when the plant closed down in 1966, nearly all of the archival information, such as the builders' photos and drawings and all other types of documentation, were destroyed. Now, there was a company photographer who kept a lot of photographs of the buses and coaches in his home, and after the plant closed, he claimed that his house was burglarized and the photographs were stolen, which is kind of odd because I don't know who would steal photographs of buses, but okay, that's the story. So anyway, let's get started in taking a look at the Harrington Cavalier and Grenadier. One of the most well-known but now shuttered coach builders in the UK was Thomas Harrington. From its beginnings in 1897 as a builder of horse-drawn vehicles until its closure in 1966, Harrington was often at the forefront of innovative coach design. Unfortunately, most of the company's archival material, such as builders' photographs and drawings, were destroyed upon closure. One of the last new coaches from Harrington were the Cavalier, followed by the very similar Grenadier. Launched at the end of 1959, the Cavalier was ahead of the competition in many, if not all, respects. Certainly its external appearance was of classic beauty, combining curves, sharp angles, and peaks in aesthetic harmony. This, combined with understated use of bright trim in a way that made it stand out from competing models, had combined style with good taste. The double curvature windscreen was not only perfectly in line with the style of the body, but it helped nighttime coach drivers by eliminating interior reflections. Most likely due to its sculpted design, the Cavalier had become one of the most admired and best remembered classic British coach designs. It was in production for 6 years and was still highly regarded when Harrington decided to cease coach building. Perhaps it was that the end came while it was still on top, and it never suffered a slow declining fate, such as what had happened to Burlingham's much revised Seagull design. From the front of the coach, the Cavalier had tall, curved, rubber-mounted windscreens. The rubber used was thicker than previously seen, and the same section detail would come to be used by Plaxton and Duple in the future. In fact, the overall appearance of the whole front panel of the coach was superbly executed right from the start. It abandoned the use of a large dummy radiator grille which had been used on previous designs, regardless of the fact that the radiator was actually behind the setback front axle. Sufficient air was allowed underneath the coach by a wide grille below the bumper, which was much less obtrusive. Remarkably, the stepped waist rail also made a reappearance in almost exactly the same place as the first Harrington Wayfarers produced 10 years earlier. The first Cavalier body was number 2200, registered in February of 1960 as RNJ 900. The Cavalier was an immediate success. Significant advanced orders were taken on the strength of just drawings alone. As early as August of 1959, firm contracts for 10 coaches each were placed by Timpson's and Northern General. There were smaller orders of 4 with East Yorkshire and 3 to South Wales Transport. Although the orders were in, Cavalier production did not commence immediately. For the remainder of 1959, the factory was kept busy with significant bulk orders for the Crusader and bus exports to Barbados. Once started, though, production soon quickened. Although the Cavalier was supplied in ones or twos to independents, an order of up to 10 to a BET company was much more likely. The Cavalier was built upon the following chassis. Number 1, AEC Reliance. Number 2, Leyland Leopard. And number 3, Leyland Tiger Cub. The AEC Reliance was the most popular chassis. Out of the 40 Cavaliers, only 4 were Leyland, specifically the Tiger Cub, even though the Leyland Leopard had been introduced in 1959. Finally, in February of 1961, an order went to Northern General, who, obviously satisfied with their first batch, returned for another 10 bodies, but this time on the Leopard chassis. Some of the coaches ordered by Timpson's were specially equipped for continental touring. Taking account of the continental practice of driving on the other side of the road, there was also an automatic fold-out step connected to the emergency door, thus allowing passengers to disembark away from the traffic passing by. Another highly attractive feature found on all Cavaliers, later to be extended to other models, was the lift-up side panels. This cantilever system was patented by Harrington. Its main function was to provide lacquer covers that were not hinged at the top and therefore could be opened using less space. This was useful in crowded coach parks with closely spaced vehicles. Following a change to coach construction regulations, a Cavalier built to the newly allowable length of 36 feet by 8 feet 2.5 inches arrived in March of 1962. This allowed an increase from 41 to 51 passengers. In common with many other coach builders' designs to the new length, the Cavalier 36 tends to look busy from the side due to the number of windows. The short option Cavalier was extended to 31 feet 5 inches long, and this change was accommodated entirely by varying the window length at the stepped waist rail. A few of the older length of 30 feet coaches were still built on request after this date. In all, 359 Cavaliers had been built, with a breakdown as follows: 1 30-foot demonstrator, 1 36-foot demonstrator, 357 coaches sold, of which 199 were 30 feet, 65 were 30 feet 5 inches, and 93 were 36 feet. 3 years after the introduction of the Cavalier, Harrington introduced its near twin, the Grenadier. The Grenadier really was slightly more than a facelifted Cavalier, but of course, unfortunately, due to be often mistaken and called by the same name as the older design. From the start, the Grenadier was constructed to take advantage of a change in legislation that permitted construction to a maximum width of 8 feet 2.5 inches. The official debut was at the October 1962 Earl's Court Commercial Motor Show with 2 36-foot models. Whether Harrington planned to gradually phase out the Cavalier after the introduction of the Grenadier is not known. In fact, orders for the Cavalier were so strong that it was nearly a year before Grenadiers were delivered in any quantity. When the Grenadier appeared to the maximum allowable dimensions, Harrington took the opportunity to increase the luxury of the seats. Given the small size increase, this may seem hardly worthwhile, but some operators have sometimes fitted Grenadier seats into Cavaliers, and the reduction in center gangway width was very obvious. The Grenadier had the same overall style as the Cavalier, but the differences, though subtle, were sometimes significant. An important point for the passengers was a change to the ventilation arrangements. This was made possible by incorporating air intakes into the peak above the windscreen and using Smith's jet vent outlets above each seat. It was now possible to discontinue sliding top vent windows and instead have large fixed glazing to the coach sides. Naturally, this was not universally popular, and sliding vents were made available as an option, but at increased cost, despite the deletion of the Smith's system. Overall, 192 Grenadiers were built, divided among the following: 1 to a 33-foot length, 82 to 31 feet 10 inches, and 109 to 36 feet. So, how else do you tell the difference between a Cavalier and a Grenadier? Unlike many of Harrington's other body designs, the Cavalier and Grenadier did not run to more than the original Mark I version, although it could be argued that in reality, the Grenadier is a Cavalier Mark II. The Cavalier first appeared in 1959 and the Grenadier in 1963. Both were available in differing lengths, although when the Cavalier first appeared, the maximum allowable was only 30 feet. The shortest Grenadier was 31 feet. Surprisingly, the least useful place to use as a recognition point is the front of the coach. So we will start at the back. The Cavalier has a vertical rear light assembly with a standard rectangular BMAC light unit set into a Harrington-made aluminum embellisher that includes reflectors and sometimes reversing lights. The Grenadier has a more modern horizontal arrangement with an anodized surround for rear indicator and reversing lights, though again these were optional and some coaches had a separate brake and side light. The use of fiberglass enabled Harrington to produce a much more crisply styled roofline for what had previously been described as the dome. Heavily influenced by continental designs, the Cavalier used very tall screens, but the Grenadiers were even taller still, and this was achieved by flattening out the roofline. Below the peak were the Cavalier's intakes for the Smith's forced ventilation system. Although the front panels differed from body to body depending upon the type of destination display fitted, the Cavalier was usually instantly recognized by its strong, smiling molding across the front. The Grenadier was perhaps a little too busy, but this is a matter of taste. Previously mentioned was that the front was a bad place to look to tell the difference between the Cavalier and Grenadier. This is because for various reasons, this panel could be interchanged to the other model, and certainly sometimes was. And lastly, a common mistake is to assume that if the coach has top opening ventilation windows on the sides, then it must be a Cavalier. But in fact, these could be ordered as an option on both models. The last Grenadier was body number 3218 for Greenslades of Exeter. It was one of a batch of 4 built to the shorter 31-foot 10 inches specification. Despite the significance of this vehicle, it is not believed that there was any special feature that designated it as the last Harrington. As for preservation, thankfully there's a good number of Cavaliers and Grenadiers that have been saved and restored. And if you really like this type of coach, there is many 1/76 scale models to choose from. So, there you have it, the story of the Harrington Cavalier and Grenadier. Now, you really have to wonder if Harrington had stayed in business for another decade or so, or possibly even into the year 1980, what would they have produced? Most likely it would have been something that would have looked like a Plaxton Panorama Elite or maybe a Duple Dominant. But unfortunately, at the time the plant decided to close, there was no funds available to develop a replacement for the Cavalier and Grenadier, so the decision was made to cease coach building, which was really unfortunate. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this look at the Harrington Cavalier and Grenadier. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day. Bye.